Hey everyone, welcome back to the Heathen Path. I hope you all have had a wonderful week and now would like you to sit down, chill out, and learn about some heathenist history with me as your host, Jordy. So today I decided I was going to try out this video recording. I just thought it would be nice for you guys to see my face and to see the animation of my face while you listen to me. So we're going to try this out and see if this is where it's at moving forward. So I am Jordy. I am the host of the Heathen Path. And today I wanted to start out going way, way back. Before the broomsticks, before the black cats, before the pointy hats, to ask a deceptively simple question. Who was the first witch ever recorded in history? I think a lot of people realize and know that witches have kind of always been a part of history, but I wanted to know who was the first recorded witches. Not folklore, not fairy tales, not Halloween decor. I'm talking about the first witch whose name was actually written down. And to find her, we have to travel nearly 4,000 years into the past to ancient Mesopotamia. So we're in Mesopotamia, the first witch in the written record. The earliest known named witch in recorded history appears in Mesopotamian texts from around 1800 BC, and her name, Hulupu, tree demoness, is what that translates to. Sometimes associated with early female sorcery figures, but more clearly, we see references in Akkadian incantation texts to female spellcasters called Kashaptu. And I apologize if I pronounced that wrong. I don't have any friends that are from Acadia or Mesopotamia, so I apologize. The word Kashaptu literally means female sorcerer or witch. So here's the important part. These weren't fantasy characters. They appear in legal and magical texts as real people accused of harmful magic. Ancient Mesopotamians believed witches could cause illness, destroy crops, break marriages, summon spirits, inflict nightmares. Basically, if something went wrong and you couldn't explain it, blame the witch. Sound familiar? Witchcraft as a crime was around 4,000 years ago. So in ancient Babylonia, witchcraft wasn't just spooky, it was illegal. The Code of Hammurabi, written around 1754 BCE, includes laws about accusations of sorcery. If someone accused you of witchcraft, you might have to undergo a trial by ordeal, often involving being thrown into a river. If you drowned, guilty. If you survived, congratulations, you're innocent. And probably traumatized. We did go over that in last week's episode, but it still hits the same this week as it did last week. So right away, we see a pattern that echoes through history. Fear of magic plus unexplained misfortune equals persecution. Were these witches actually magical? Probably not. Most historians believe these early witches were healers, midwives, herbalists, spiritual practitioners, or simply women who were socially vulnerable. The irony? Mesopotamia also had approved magic. There were official exorcists and ritual specialists who worked for temples and kings. Kind of like today's Southern Baptist pastors getting their amens and priests exorcising the demons. Magic wasn't the problem. Unregulated magic was. If you performed rituals outside official religious structures, you were suspicious, dangerous, subversive. And that tension between accepted religion and forbidden magic becomes a recurring theme throughout history, as I'm sure you've seen. The witch is a woman. So, one fascinating thing, the earliest texts often describe witches as female. The term kashaptu is specifically feminine. There were male sorcerers too, but they were called kashapu. But the female witch becomes the dominant cultural image very, very early on. Why? Well, here we go. Because women were often associated with birth, blood, herbal knowledge, domestic rituals, emotional influence. In societies where control and hierarchy mattered deeply, independent female knowledge could easily become threatening. And that seed, that suspicion, grows over the centuries. So now you're seeing the echoes through time. From Mesopotamia, the idea of the witch spreads and evolves. In ancient Israel, the Hebrew Bible references the witch of Endor in the book of Samuel, a medium who summons the spirit of the prophet Samuel. In ancient Greece, figures like Circe appear in Odyssey, powerful women using potions and transformation magic. And by the time we reach early modern Europe, witchcraft hysteria explodes into full-scale panic, culminating in events like the Salem witch trials, all of the stuff that we went over last week. But the blueprint, it's already there in Mesopotamia. Fear of hidden power, fear of women outside authority, fear of what can't be controlled. So who was this first witch? We don't have a single named woman we can point to and say she was it, she was the first witch. Instead, what we have are texts describing a type of person, Kashaptu, feared, accused, and ritualistically opposed. The first witch in history isn't one individual. She's a category. She's like a label, a projection of anxiety onto someone vulnerable. And that's what makes her so powerful historically. So, the bigger picture. When we ask who the first witch was, we're really asking, when did humans first decide that unseen power in the hands of certain people was dangerous? The answer? Almost as soon as we started writing things down, which tells us something profound. Witches aren't just supernatural figures, they're social mirrors. They reveal what a culture fears, who it mistrusts, and where power boundaries lie. The first witch in history wasn't flying around on a broomstick. She was probably mixing herbs, whispering prayers, living on the edge of society. And someone, somewhere, decided she was dangerous. So next time you see a witch in a story, remember, she's carrying 4,000 years of history behind her. And that history began not with a fairy tale, but with an accusation carved into clay. Okay, so long before the hysteria of colonial America, long before the broomsticks became Halloween decor, to the very first recorded European witch trial. Not the famous, not the deadliest, the first one historians can clearly document. And to find it, we're going to travel to the early 14th century, to Ireland, to a woman named Alice Keitler. This is the story of the 1324 Kilkenny witch trial, widely considered the first fully documented European witch trial. And it is far, far more complicated and political than you might expect. So sit back and relax because here we go. Okay, so to understand why Alice's trial matters, we need to understand something important. In the early Middle Ages, witchcraft was not the burning, hysterical panic we imagine. For centuries meaning hundreds of years, the church's official position was skeptical. There was a document called the Canon Aposcope from around the 10th century. It argued that women who believed they flew as spirits at night were deluded, not evil, not servants of Satan. They were just mistaken. In other words, early medieval Christianity often dismissed witchcraft as superstition. So, what changed? By the 13th and 14th centuries, Europe was shifting. The church was consolidating power, the Inquisition was expanding. Heresy became a serious political concern. The Black Death was looming. Society was anxious, to say the least. And in times of anxiety, people look for enemies. So, enter Alice. Let's talk about the woman at the center of the story. Alice Keitler was wealthy, very wealthy. She lived in Kilkenny, Ireland in the early 1300s. She was married 4 times. And here's the detail that made people suspicious. Every single one of her husbands died. And each time, she inherited substantial property. Now let's pause. In medieval Europe, widows inheriting property was already socially uncomfortable. A woman controlling wealth without a husband? That upset power structures. Huge time. But 4 husbands? That was definitely more noticeable. Her stepchildren accused her of poisoning their fathers, not just poisoning, but using magic. They claimed she practiced sorcery, consulted demons, created potions, denied the Christian faith, sacrificed animals, had a demonic lover named Robin Artisan. Now we're not just talking about folk magic. We're talking about full-blown diabolical witchcraft, the kind that would later dominate European witch trials. So then we start talking about Bishop Richard de Ledrede. The man who pursued the case was Richard de Ledrede, Bishop of Ossory. I'm probably butchering these names. I apologize in advance. He was a Franciscan friar deeply committed to rooting out heresy. And here's where things get interesting. The charges against Alice weren't just about poisoning, they were about heresy, which meant the church could intervene. Ledrede accused her of renouncing Christ, sacrificing to demons, making powders from the dead, making powders from dead children's remains, engaging in sexual relations with a demon named Robin, which is kind of hot. I'm not going to lie. This language is significant because it introduces something new to European legal records, the idea of a witch in league with the devil. That concept, witches as Satan's servants, would later explode across Europe in the 15th to 17th centuries. But here in 1324, we definitely see it clearly articulated. So this trial wasn't just religious, it was political. Alice was connected, powerful, wealthy. She had allies among the Anglo-Irish nobility. And when Bishop Ledrede tried to arrest her, local authorities resisted. Some even jailed the bishop. That's right. The bishop accusing her of witchcraft got thrown in prison. This right here tells us something crucial. The case wasn't universally accepted. It was contested. It was political maneuvering. Eventually, the bishop was released and the trial moved forward. But here's the twist. Alice escaped. She fled to England before she could be convicted, and history at that point loses track of her completely. So, the first execution then, if Alice escaped, who paid the price? Sadly, her maidservant, Petronilla de Meath. Petronilla was arrested, tortured, and forced to confess. And under that torture, she admitted to assisting Alice in witchcraft, making magical ointments, denying Christ, having sexual relations with demons. She was publicly flogged and burned at the stake in 1324. This is widely considered the first recorded execution for witchcraft in Europe. And notice the pattern. The wealthy, connected woman escapes, the poor servant is executed. The pattern, too, will repeat throughout European witch hunts. Why this matters. The Kilkenny trial marks a turning point. Before this, witchcraft accusations were often isolated or treated as minor superstition. After this, the narrative shifts. We see witchcraft linked explicitly with demonology, torture used to extract confessions, execution by burning, formal legal prosecution. These elements would later become standard during the great witch hunts of the 15th to 17th centuries. Think of this case as a prototype. It basically laid the groundwork. Hey, all you heathens, it's Jordy, favorite heathen. I wanted to come in here real quick and invite you guys over to the Whatnot app. I am a live seller over there, and I do crystals, jerky, I do naughty trivia, I do readings, all the fun things, and it's live sales. So I get to communicate with you guys and talk to you guys while I'm live, which I think is so cool. It gives a very, very personal approach to it. And I want to meet you guys. So if you hit the Whatnot app, search Jordy Lee 123, and you will find me over there on Whatnot. Other than that, I will see you next time on the Heathen Path. Bye. Okay, so now we are going to fast forward about 150 years. If you remember from last week, we discussed the Malleus Maleficarum. In 1487, the Malleus Maleficarum is published by Heinrich Kramer. And that manual, if you remember correctly, argues that witches are predominantly women, sexually linked to the devil, organized in secret conspiracies. Again, sound familiar? The themes in Alice Keitler's case, demon lovers, heresy, ritual magic, are echoed and amplified times 10. From the 1400s through the 1600s, tens of thousands of people across Europe would be executed for witchcraft. Germany, France, Scotland, Switzerland, eventually even colonial America in the Salem witch trials. But chronologically, the Kilkenny trial comes first in documented European records. So was Alice guilty? Historically, there's no credible evidence she practiced magic. More likely explanations would be property disputes, family inheritance conflicts, gender resentment, religious zeal, political power struggles. Her stepchildren had financial motives. The bishop had theological motives. Local officials had political motives. And Petronilla had literally no power at all. So what does this tell us? The first recorded European witch trial was not about fucking broomsticks. It was about wealth. It was about control. It was about gender. It was about religion, authority. It shows us how quickly accusations of supernatural evil can become tools of power. It shows us how social tension becomes spiritual fear. It reminds us that witch trials didn't begin in a frenzy. They began with one case, one accusation, one bishop determined to prove a point. So when we think of witch trials, we often picture roaring flames and mass hysteria. But history rarely starts with explosions. It starts with precedents. The 1324 trial of Alice Keitler and the execution of Petronilla de Meath was one of those precedents. It planted ideas that would grow into centuries of persecution. And it shows us something unsettling. The first European witch trial wasn't driven by superstition alone, it was driven by power. And power, when mixed with fear, can turn suspicion into fire. So, next time we might explore how those early ideas evolved into full scale witch panics across Europe. But for now, remember this: before Salem, before the Malleus Maleficarum, before the hysteria, there was Kilkenny and a woman who escaped. All right. So now hopefully you all have learned a little something about the history of witches and can go be proud of your heathen tendencies that reflect this ancient history. Be proud, be kind, and I will see you next time on the Heathen Path. Bye, guys.